Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Can We Ask You This podcast. My name is Corey.
And I'm Rosalind.
And we are so grateful for you spending time with us today. The Can We Ask You This podcast is a place to hear real stories from real people, gain perspective, get uncomfortable, and maybe even create some change. We want to hold space and give a voice to people who have been hurt by the church or wonder if they have a place in the church. This podcast is about listening, learning, and truly seeing each person as invaluable in the eyes of God.
Yeah, on today's episode, we have an amazing guest. Her name is Rachel, and she is somebody that grew up in the occult. And if you're like me, you don't know what that means. It doesn't sound good, but I had to do a quick Google search to figure it out. But then she tells us later on in the episode to not Google it. So just listen to this episode and you will find it out.
Yeah, this episode, it's so enlightening, I would say, just to a different reality that I don't think many of us are aware of or talk about. There's a lot of questions that get asked this episode, and it even creates some more questions.
Yep.
But love Rachel's openness and honesty with her journey.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest focuses of this episode is spiritual warfare.
Yes.
The difference between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. I'll speak for myself. I think that I don't think about that enough, and I'm sure a lot of believers don't. Her story really just brought an awareness to it that's like, it's just amazing. Her story's amazing.
Amazing. So,
yeah,
listeners, let's jump in. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being with us today.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Oh, excited about this conversation.
So maybe we'll get started and you can tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe like your childhood, where you grew up, just a little bit of background on who you are.
On who I am. That is a big question.
Yes.
So
and you can
back.
set the stage. I know we're probably going to dive right into your story here, but set the stage for us.
You can. That's awesome. I actually grew up in Alberta. I purposely don't usually name the town because my whole story is not to point fingers or to make anybody afraid of any specific place, just because of what I grew up in. But I am a Calgarian for the last 22 years, and this is where really my whole journey began. So I did grow up in the occult, and as a child who was trapped in a family that raised me and trained me, I just didn't realize this until my teens. And so the story of becoming who I am, and I've written a book that's called Becoming Rachel on purpose because I grew up under a different name. I grew up in a family that was not biologically related to me. I grew up in darkness, but with a two-sided coin, which is an interesting part of the story that not a lot of people will recognize. In darkness, we always think of it as very black and white. You know, there's the church and there's the kingdom of God and there's light, and darkness is the kingdom of the enemy and Satan, and it's dark, but very often there's an overlap and there's a lot of gray. And so I grew up as a kid with one foot in church and one foot in Christianity. I knew God, but I didn't realize that there was a two-way mirror in my life. And at night, in the dark, there was a whole other world happening where I was being taken to rituals. Satanic ritual abuse is what happens in the kingdom of darkness, where they control and they manipulate and they program basically people in fear and in torture and with pain. And so I was completely controlled by darkness while having a foot in the church and in the kingdom of God. And so the duplicity is what's always so shocking to me. I honestly think this is really the enemy's strategy. Is the word talks about him disguising himself as an angel of light, of being, you know, a father of lies. Like, he can't do anything really creative. He can't make anything new, but he can take what is here, like especially someone like me who belongs to God. I fully believe that I was a yes girl to God. I knew God as my father from an early age. And so because of that, God's fingerprint was on me. So no matter how much in darkness I was, God saw me and was just waiting for the time that he could pull me out of this life. But the enemy's strategy in using me and turning me for evil is a very good strategy that he has, which I think is that he's always going to be an affront to God. He's always going to try and basically slap God in the face if he can by doing what he does. And so I talk about always two kingdoms. There's the kingdom of God in this world, and there's the kingdom of the enemy, because those are always in conflict. Those are always, since the fall, right? Since
Yes.
Eden, they're always in conflict. And the ultimate goal is that God wants his for eternity. He wants to bring everyone that he can into his kingdom for eternity, and the enemy wants to take as many down with him as he can, because he has a destiny that's coming regardless of what he thinks. He is going down, right? And so I was caught right in the middle of that, quite literally, in that I had a destiny in the kingdom of darkness from my family and from those that were around me in the occult world. And God said, I am going to pull you out of that when the time is right. So I lived the first 20 years of my life with 2 feet, one in each kingdom.
Yeah.
And then God said, no more. And that was my story of deliverance. So growing up, I actually was very unaware of the duplicity of this. So
It's your normal.
it's my normal.
Yeah. Right.
I was the actually perfect kid. And that was a red flag to me, because I didn't recognize the abnormality I was living in because it looked so good. So our family was the normal Christian family. I was homeschooled with my 2 brothers. We grew up absolutely perfect, no rebellion, no talking back, no fighting. I didn't realize till later that's not normal. That's abnormal in any family dynamic. But there was this blanket of shine, basically, and it was to cover everything over. So the enemy, for my life and destiny, the enemy didn't want me to be discovered as this duality, and he didn't want me to be found. And so I was very hidden. And the way I was hidden was because of the amount of trauma that you experience growing up in this world with so much evil. I was broken apart by extreme dissociation, so fragmented into a couple thousand parts. And so I was very manipulatable at night, but I lived, me as the main me, lived in the daytime in my normal homeschooled Christian life and had no awareness of it until my teens. And then everything started to unravel.
I have so many questions.
I know,
I believe
like-
you do.
Okay.
Can I, just for clarification, what is the occult?
That is the best question ever.
I did Google it.
And I was going to say, we can, of course, Google it. And I'm going to have some interpretations that might go a little bit different than what Google would say, because I know
Great.
there's different levels.
That's great.
And most people would associate the word occult with supernatural and supernatural things in terms of darkness and evil. So you think of witchcraft, you think of spells and incantations and sorcery and all the words that we kind of associate with what has been evil in this world. I grew up in more of what I would call an organized group. So if you think of how the church is God's vessel on earth to bring light into the world and to bring him, Satan also has an organized church and a group, and they are very underground. They're very not known and not seen. And I grew up in more of that than just what I would call the supernatural realm. So it was very planned. It's very organized. It's very detailed. It has destiny. People like me are born into this world, and the enemy has a plan to use them for his purposes. And so I become a vessel almost, just like in the kingdom of God, I am his, right? And he moves through humans to accomplish his purposes. So does the enemy. He moves through humans. So he needs human vessels to be able to basically inflict evil in the world and to see his plan succeed. When I talk about the occult, I talk about the organized group that is very hidden, not so much the verb or the noun even that says it's supernatural things like witchcraft and spells.
Right.
When you talk about, like, during the day, you were Christian homeschooled family, which, by the way, you don't have to be homeschooled to be Christian. I know. Disclaimer.
They do sometimes go hand in hand.
Sure. But so you were that during the day, and then this might be a dumb question, but were you not sleeping at night? Like, how did this work
That's
at
what I thought.
nighttime?
That is completely what I thought. I was the kid who never woke up at night, and I realized later that's kind of abnormal. I never got up to go to the bathroom. I never woke up, basically. But how that works with all of the many parts that I have is I would actually go to bed at night, and then a part of me would be triggered or cued out by someone and would wake up and would be taken to rituals. And I would not know.
Who was waking you up?
My family.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they would take you to rituals?
Yeah.
where would so many questions. Where would the rituals be?
Oh, all over the place, indoors, sometimes in specific buildings and halls that are used for purposes like this. Outside, woods a lot is used, and outdoors where it's hidden.
So when you say a part of you, was it like a coping mechanism as a child that you probably just dissociated and just...
Yeah, dissociation comes when a person handles and sees and is witness to too much pain and trauma, and they can't handle it. And I look at it as a breaking. It's like the body, the mind, the soul, the emotions cannot handle what they're seeing and what they're in. And so you break, and your mind creates another entity to take that so that you can keep living. It's kind of like the atom splitting. I use that as a visual very often to describe it. It's like you are whole. We're whole, right? Body, soul, and spirit. That's how God created us. And then when inflicted with too much pain that it can't handle, especially when you're very young and trauma starts in the womb, believe it or not, for people living in this. And little ones don't have the ability to comprehend or even understand what's happening. And so there's this breaking. And every time there's a break and there's this new part, it is like there's many different people living within one body, but only one can present on the outside at one time. And so when I talk about living in the day, I was the presenter for the daytime. And I lived this life out here unawares because that was such a great cover. I was such a great cover. I was a great performer. I was a great fake, in all honesty. Yeah. I didn't realize what I actually was, but I lived in the daytime, and all of these other parts, they only knew night. Wow. So when I walked through healing and deliverance and they would come out, they sometimes would be absolutely blinded by daylight because they'd never seen daylight. Wow. So I was really raised to be what I call an army of one. So the enemy had so many manipulatable, controllable parts within one body that he could use, and they all had different functions and roles, and they all had assignments that they were supposed to do, and they all had things that they were supposed to implement for the kingdom of darkness. So he had an army of one in me. I'm one body, but I was so many people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Again, so many questions.
I know. You almost go into that blank. I don't know what to think about this.
You mentioned that this was not your biological family. Can you share a little bit about?
I can, and only a little bit, because all of the truth about who I actually was and how I was raised and who I belonged to biologically all came from God, or God and some of my parts, as they were out still before I was integrated and made whole again. And so I believe fully that I was born into the occult through different parents who were not together and were not a family unit for the purpose of being placed in a family to be raised. It's, again, part of the duplicity. So part of the lies and part of all of the trauma that the enemy can inflict is very often that you don't know where you belong. You don't know who you are. You don't know whose you are. Or he tries to make you believe that you don't know whose you are. And so my birth parents, I only met through rituals. And I lived with the family that I was placed in the rest of the time, the rest of my growing up. And I didn't realize this until my teens, as things started to unravel and I started questioning. I started to realize I don't think I belong here in this family. But all of that didn't come out until I was given this open door to come into deliverance and freedom. And then all of a sudden, all the questions started being answered. God didn't answer all of them. He didn't go to the questions that I had that were solely for the sake of knowing how I got into this world, because he told me I was his. He uses vessels to bring people into the world, of course, but that doesn't actually change who I am. So knowing my biological parents and knowing more about them does not actually change who he made me to be.
Of course.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of those questions have gone unanswered. And I realized I don't need them, because once I found out who I belonged to, God, I was his daughter, and he revealed so much of who I was meant to be, as opposed to all the lies I was living under. The rest of the questions didn't matter anymore.
Wow. Obviously, we want to get to that redemptive part, but I just want to ask, you talked about the different parts and like evening, I guess, like first of all, were you not tired all day? And then second of all, what were these different parts for? Do you have any recollection of that, or like what you were
A little
doing?
bit. Yeah, a little bit. So again, part of the aspect of dissociation is to keep you so unaware and in amnesia, basically. I had amnesia. I was not aware of what was happening. It was very separate from me. I used to think of myself as a revolving door. So I knew that there was something happening inside me that wasn't right. But I was always on the outside. And whenever the door revolved, I just disappeared for a time. And then I came back out again, unaware of what was happening when I went inside. And someone else revolved to the outside of the building, basically me, my body. So you almost need to see it visually, which is a hard thing to describe because you're looking at a single person right here, right? And you're
explaining it
seeing
really well.
someone.
Yeah, I do too. The revolving door makes sense.
The revolving door to me was just, it's the basic way to explain there's always one person in control of the body, so in control of the functions, like what I'm looking at and what I'm saying. And then that can switch in a heartbeat. It's called switching. There's many different terms if you think about it in the mental health community. Triggers are always usually the cue. And again, triggers is a word that's very commonly known now. It kind of has a bit of a different connotation in the occult because it has a very specific purpose.
Right.
So there's a keyword, there's a phrase, there's a song, there's a sound, whatever it might be that was basically programmed into a part. When that is heard, they know they're supposed to come out.
Wow.
And then they have things that they're supposed to do. So in terms of what I was supposed to do, I won't go into details.
Sure.
A lot of those memories came back to me later in life
That was
after
another
healing.
question. Yeah.
Memories were not a thing that were very much a part of me earlier on, like before deliverance and freedom and healing. But memories came later. And God, honestly, in all of his compassion and mercy, was gracious enough to simply share the memories I needed with me. He didn't give them all back to me. And I had asked him for that, in all honesty. I asked him to not give me everything because what's the point in dissociating and completely blocking it out to just get it all back and live with it again?
Yeah.
So he gave me what was key because there were things I had to either be healed from or break with still. There's so many strings and so many ties in this kind of journey. And all of that to say it's such an interesting world. Because again, I think the enemy wants to use this kind of breaking apart and dissociation, especially in his kingdom, for all of these different purposes. But the truth is that God makes us. God knows who we are and how we're created. So even if the enemy thinks he's broken us apart, he actually can't take any credit for that. I fully believe that dissociation is a gift from God for somebody like me to be able to survive what I'm in until he can bring me to healing and restoration. So many people in the world honestly see dissociation as a mental illness and an issue to be dealt with. And yes, it is. We don't want to stay in a fractured state. We want to go back to wholeness. But while I was in that world, this was a gift. And I think it was a gift from God, and it wasn't anything to do with the enemy. He likes to take credit for things, but he can't take credit for anything because he can't create anything.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that answered that question to satisfaction.
That was great.
But
That was
please
really
let me know if you want clarity on anything else. It is a big story, and it's an interesting one to put into a small condensed time. And this is why I wrote the book, is so I could have everything out there for people.
Yeah.
That's good.
But the part of the story that's so cool is that, God can do anything, and he can pull anyone out of darkness, no matter how hidden they were. And I was very hidden.
Like even to yourself.
Even to myself.
Yeah. I think one thing that when you talked about having a foot in both worlds, I think that's so like Satan. I mean, that is Satan, but I'm like, Jesus says like, be hot or be cold, but don't be both.
Don't be both. Yeah.
And it's like Satan just had you in that place where you were totally lukewarm because you're one foot in, 1 foot out, and you didn't even know it.
It is what the enemy does best.
Yeah.
He actually takes everything that's of God and turns it. And if people want to know what the kingdom of darkness is, I always just say, just go the opposite of the kingdom of God. So where God is completely about love and free will, the enemy is completely about fear and no will.
And control.
Yeah.
Wow.
So everything's opposite.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what your life lived out looked like in the occult? Like you shared the day and night, but how does
like specifics?
Yeah, like does the night impact the day at all, or is
it does in the natural? It just didn't with me because I didn't know about it. But it definitely does in terms of even when I came here to Calgary. So I was offered freedom through a couple who had just started some inner healing and deliverance ministry. And they said, you know what, if you're ready to go here, we will walk you through this. I didn't know what I was getting into. I had a sense. I had a sense. I knew that there was things wrong. I knew I was broken. I didn't know to the degree. And I knew that there was something wrong and that I didn't want to live in what I was in already. So I know that there's an overlap because when I came to stay with them, they would tell me later of the stories of someone trying to sneak out at night and get past their doors and their deadbolts. And then they had a part of me actually tell them, hey, people are leaving at night. You might want to lock your door from the inside and take the key. So I had assignments. I had things that I was supposed to do. And if you think of assignments, it's almost like I can break myself down in some ways to something similar to like a Jason Bourne story or a CIA story. There's things that the enemy wants me to do, and it's almost always against the church. He doesn't care about inflicting more pain into darkness. He cares about taking and destroying the truth and God's light and God's children. So he would have assignments in me, in the parts of me, for example, to go to church and curse and bring things into the church and release things in a church, because he's always trying to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking.
That is the purpose.
Yeah, like how it actually like lived out with you and your family.
Exactly. It's that. The purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy.
Wow.
So there's many ways that he does that, and very often it's subtle. It's underneath. It's very hidden. It's things that people on the everyday basis, when I walk by somebody in the mall, they would never know that I was bringing darkness into that place and was assigning demons to people and was doing all kinds of things, right? So they would never know. It's meant to be hidden. It's not meant to be seen. And that was the hardest part about it. Like you said, having one foot in the church and one foot in darkness is I wasn't seen for who I was. I wasn't seen for what I was doing. So how could I have possibly been in a way that good and that fake that I was undetectable? Well, I was meant to be undetectable. I was so layered. There were so many levels in me. There was so much organization and control that I wasn't meant to be detectable.
It really makes me think about, as you say that, like you're at the mall and assigning demons to people. And it makes me think about like sometimes I'll just speak for myself, but I'm not always as aware. I feel like probably a lot of Christians aren't as aware that that stuff is happening. And like, we need to also be actively releasing demons like from people, you know, like we need to be at the mall and praying for people as we walk past, just like people, just as easily as you could do that when you were in the occult. Like,
I know.
It makes me think we need to be on our guard.
It's a flip side, isn't it? Yeah. It's a flip side to realize that.
And when I say releasing demons, I mean like
from people.
Getting rid of them. Yeah,
yes.
Just to be clear.
Yeah,
just to be clear.
Yeah. My releasing demons was a different style in terms of putting them on, but I understand where you're coming from. And this is something that I have lived in. So it's normal to me. It's part of my everyday just to realize we're in a battlefield all the time. Earth is that central battlefield. The war is between heaven and hell, right? We as humans, we're caught in the middle of it, but we don't always realize that it is happening all around us at all times because we don't see into the heavenly realms, right? And we don't see also, it's so easy to focus on the enemy sometimes, which is something I never want to do because I don't give him credit or glory for anything. And he's so much smaller. But those scriptures that talk about there's more with us than with them, like there are more angels than there are demons. You know, Satan is not equal to Jesus. He was an archangel. They're not on the same level in this playing field. And so when we think about the battle, the enemy is always trying to make himself look bigger. He's always trying to make himself look stronger. It's so easy to focus on the demonic or what's happening in the kingdom of darkness and to be overwhelmed by it and intimidated by it. And he does this on purpose, that we don't see the other. Like, what about all the other that's happening? Like you said, what if the fact that whenever we walk somewhere, we are actually releasing light with our foot? You know, we are taking ground and we're taking territory for God where we walk because of who he's made us to be. Yeah. So there are those two worlds always in conflict in this world. And we don't see it because we live so much in the natural. And I'm not encouraging anyone to live entirely in the supernatural either, because we are meant to be on this earth. We are meant to be body, soul, and spirit. We have the physical and the spiritual. So you can't be overly spiritual too in always looking for those things like the demons or the angels. It's an interesting conflict because we know who wins.
Yeah.
You know, we as believers know who wins. So it's almost easier to look at this battle with a different perspective than anybody else. And it's true. I agree with you. We are bringing light wherever we go, and light dispels darkness. It's a promise.
Yeah.
So what would you say to encourage the average follower of Jesus who maybe walks a little bit more on the physical side to help them walk on the spiritual side and bring kind of that awareness to wherever they go? What would you say to them to encourage them or help them understand that it's not just the physical? I think we know that, but it's so easy just to walk in the physical world because it's tangible.
Because it's tangible. It is so hard to face what's unknown. And even in my journey, the biggest fears were always around what's unknown. So for a lot of people, Christians especially, just to look at the supernatural and the kingdom of darkness and the reality of it is a very scary thought. It's a very intimidating thought. And we would rather believe that the second heaven realm is kind of where all the battle's taking place, and down here we're just getting the drippings and we can go on kind of living this way. But in all honesty, that's a big question to answer. I think if you hunger for more, if you're hungry for more of God and deeper things, because God is so limitless, there's so much of him we can find, that if you're hungry for deeper things of the spiritual, his word for sure, right? And his spirit, those two have to mesh. You cannot go overly spiritual without having roots and foundation in the word, because they are married. They go hand in hand. And so digging into his word is a great place to start, and asking him for revelation of what it is to you and what your place is in the spiritual is a great thing too, because you don't want to go somewhere you're not supposed to go. We don't want to go somewhere in the kingdom of darkness. We don't want to look into the things of evil to be able to basically expose and find the enemy. God asks us to look to him first. He will expose the enemy. My biggest caution to people, because this world is one of fascination. It's one of allure and compelling. The enemy knows how to put a sheen on so much, right? We see it in the New Age movement. We see it in so many things that are attracting people because of this like mystical, supernatural concept. But the enemy has such an allure in that, and he will pull you down a very dark rabbit hole very quickly. So I always caution people, even after hearing my story, is don't go online and start digging into what is the occult, what are rituals. Don't go down that avenue. You can't unsee what you see. You can't unlearn what you've learned. And it's the strategy I think God gives us, which is you don't want to know the enemy. You want to know the Lord. You don't want to find out how the enemy works. Just ask God, who already sees everything. And for me, that was the biggest key in my life, is as soon as I started to focus on the enemy, I would get smoke and mirrors, and I would be led down a road of absolute chaos and confusion, and I would end up in a worse place than I started. But God was always telling us, you know what? Through my spirit, look to me. I will give you everything that you need, but don't look to the enemy. It's kind of a battlefield strategy in all honesty, right? Soldiers, they don't need to know what the enemy is doing. They need to know their commander. And they trust their commander, and so they'll go and do whatever the commander tells them. So Jesus is our commander in this battle. So really, I encourage people, don't look to the enemy. Don't start digging into this world to try and figure it out, because you'll get lost. And you might get lost with the fascination, but you actually might get lost. He's got so many hooks. He will hook so many things as you start looking into him, because we're giving focus to him, which gives him power. And anytime you start giving him things, authority, your agreement, your consent, you are welcoming darkness into your life you're not aware of. And for me, I know the power of that. So I definitely encourage people, don't give him those footholds. If you can, don't give the enemy a chance to start wreaking havoc in your life. So ask God for sure. Ask Holy Spirit to bring truth and revelation, right? He's the spirit of wisdom. He will show you what you need to know if you're hungry for more, and know what God is giving you to press into things that are spiritual and deeper. And if he's not giving it to you, don't go there. That's my biggest,
good.
that is my biggest advice in all honesty, because we can get lost, like you said, in the super spiritual, and we can lose all feet on the earth. We just disappear.
That's so good. Yeah. So can you tell us about the moment that you described being rescued by God? What was that moment?
Yeah.
Let's get into that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Speaking of focusing on God.
That is a great segue. This was a definite moment, but it actually had a path that had been forming for years. So in my teens, in my obliviousness in life, in this unawareness and denial and amnesia that I was living in, I started asking God questions, and I have been a question person my whole life. And I think he honestly welcomes that. So I started asking him, who am I? What is this life I'm living? What is this family I'm in? Like, what is going on here? I can sense that there's more going on here. And I had already fallen in love with the written word just in my early high school English courses, quite frankly. Poetry, I discovered, and then the power of the release of this creative writing process. So I fell in love with words, and I started finding this was my release for things I couldn't explain, for what was still unknown to me. I just started writing, and I started writing poetry. And then I realized that the poems were talking about things that I didn't know about. And they were going into different handwriting, and they were being signed by different names. And I realized my parts started to tell me about their life in the darkness through my poems.
Wow.
And so this is how the unraveling began.
Amazing.
So it began to kind of unravel, like the thread in the tapestry, God just pulled one thing. And it was like everything started to, it didn't come into clarity right away. I actually probably got more confused and had more questions, but it started to fall apart. And because I was so broken, it was as though God needed to bring an unraveling so he could actually put me back together. He needed to let everything fall and become chaotic and become a mess so that he could actually start getting in there and fixing me in a sense. So I was asking him since my teens for this road out. And I continued on with life, and it wasn't coming yet. And I was 18, 19. I decided to go to college, and I went to a performing arts college in California alongside a Bible college that dealt with mime and dance and all these kind of cool expressions. And when I came back from that college, it was actually the mom that I grew up with. And to clarify, this is going to sound weird, but the mom I grew up with was my trainer. So basically my handler. And so
for the occult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she was always looking for ministries to help with digging into these things. And I followed her in that, not knowing that she was looking for ministries so she could come against them with assignments from the kingdom of darkness. So she actually brought me to a Christian psychologist. And this lady was just lovely. And she said to me, it was the best rejection I've ever had. She said, "You are way too far beyond me. I deal with multiplicity. I deal with dissociative identity disorder. But when you add in the occult and all this demonic, I don't know how to deal with this."
You knew you were in the occult?
I knew I was broken with fragmentation, and I think I knew I was in the occult on a total side rabbit trail. There was someone who came into my family's life earlier on, and she brought an awareness of the occult and all of this confusion and chaos into our world. I just didn't know it was me. I thought it was only her. And so she wove in and out of my life for most of my childhood and adolescent years. And because of that, I became aware of at least what the occult was. I just didn't think it was in me or that I was in it is actually a better way to put it until a little bit later. But I knew that I was fragmented. I knew I was broken. The poems were my first clue. I started asking God, do I have these other parts? Am I split? Am I fully, a walking army? And he said yes. And so I started pursuing that. But I was led to this psychologist, and she wasn't able to help me, which I fully believe was wisdom. And she said, "I know this couple in Calgary who just started doing inner healing and deliverance ministry. Can I give you their contact?" So through that, this couple found out I was in college in California, and they felt that God was asking them to offer me a room for the summer. So instead of going back to the town I grew up in, my parents had at this point split up. So in my late teens, they had actually divorced, the parents I was living with. And this couple here in Calgary had huge hearts, and they had a revelation from God that God was asking them to minister to me, to bring freedom. And I didn't trust anybody at this point. I had no trust in me at all. I had been told so many lies. I had so much confusion, and I had so much distrust. But I was at the end of my rope. I was completely at the end of my rope, and I said yes. Wow. So I came and stayed with them, and they started, with the help of a few other intercessors that would come and be a part of my sessions, they started to go into this. And this is where Jesus just unraveled everything else. So he took apart my system. And if you know the dissociative world, anyone who has more than a few parts and a few splits and alters has a system, and it starts to become very organized inside. Like a computer system. Quite literally, it's very much set up a bit like a computer system. But I had a system that was very in control and very resistant, actually, to God. Not all of them were happy that I was there and was looking for freedom.
Yeah.
Because there was so much in place and so much invested in them for darkness that they didn't want out until they met Jesus. So Jesus would introduce himself as he truly is to the main parts that he needed to. And when they met him as he truly is, they wanted out. They left their assignments. They left their roles. They gave up everything because it was just like, and they had been introduced to false Jesuses in the occult all the time. And so he's been so twisted. He had been so tainted that they didn't want anything to do with him. But when they met him, they went, oh my word, this is not who I thought you were. You know, you are light, you are love, you're safe. And, you know, you're giving me choice. He was such a gentleman. He never pushed in where he wasn't welcome. Jesus always asked for permission. He always goes where he has been given that authority and agreement, because we as humans, we have authority over ourselves, right? To choose, free will, to choose good or evil. And so he was always looking for that choice. And he did that by introducing himself to my parts. And then they let go of everything in darkness. Wow. So that's how the deliverance happened. I had to break with everything I was in agreement with. All those main parts had to give up their roles and assignments. And with that, they had to give up all the demonic. So it's deliverance, it's healing, it's integration, all in one big picture. And it was just the start for me, though. The journey of wholeness started after deliverance. I know a lot of people think, oh, if you're delivered, you're set free. It's like you walk through the door, everything falls off you. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. That was the start of my journey. Wow. So that was where I realized I was a totally different person than I thought I was. I had grown up in a family that wasn't mine, so I had to let go of everything and restart.
That's hard.
And the name change part, which is the amazing part, and this is how God calls us. And this, for me, the scripture, if he calls us by name, is very literal, is that this couple that offered me freedom and healing, they were praying for me. They were praying for me before I came to them, and they were praying under the old name that I had. And one night, God stopped them and said, don't call for that person. Call for Rachel. Wow. And that night, I picked up the phone and I called them and said, I will take you up on your offer and come stay with you. Wow. So when he calls you by name, it's as though everything inside you, no matter how resistant, has to say yes. Because it's like he called me through everything, through the muck, the mire, the ugliness, through all the false identity. Yeah. He called me by name and I heard it. And I wasn't even Calgary. And it was like I heard it in the spiritual realm. That call went out to the true me, and I answered.
And God knew who the true you was.
And God knew. Yeah. So he called me Rachel, regardless of the name that I was given. And through all of that, that just broke everything else down. So once the truth is set in place, oh my goodness, the false just has to fall. It cannot stand. That was the amazing part. And he fought a very big battle for me. It was a war. I was exhausted. It was beyond anything I'd ever seen. But the interesting thing about a war, when Jesus is in it, is he always wins. So no matter how big the battle was, no matter even how long it took to get through the muck and the mire, Jesus always won. So he fought the battle of deliverance for me. And then he set me on the path of true healing and wholeness and said, if you want to keep walking this, I will take you fully into who you truly are. And that journey was probably 10 to 15 years. I felt like he released me from deliverance into a cocoon where it was just me and him, and we were walking out identity. I had to let every old structure in me fall. I had to rebuild foundations. I basically had to grow up again. I went through all the phases. I went through all the phases of toddlerhood and rebellion and my teenage years, all the things that I'd missed because I was so controlled. I grew up again through all of the phases, and he walked me through everything. And he grew me up into, and I fully believe this, that we have a blueprint from God in us that is untouchable by the enemy. So he grew me up into the blueprint of who I was always supposed to be, because that is untouchable. And so no matter how much the enemy had broken me apart and put in a lot of false, that fingerprint of God is there all the time, and it's always findable. So when I came into who I truly was, you would think that it would be hard to walk away from my family and everything that I had known. But in reality, it was a relief. It was a relief to be able to say, oh, this is finally it. I think I knew this all along. This was in me somewhere. And it was actually easy to walk away from what was false. Even though the new was very unfamiliar, it was like stepping into a skin that I'd never lived in, but was always mine. And I was always supposed to belong to. So I just fully stepped into myself and went, I'm home. I'm finally home.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so good.
So with your family, are you still in contact with them, or are you?
No. So it was an interesting dynamic because my mother that I grew up with brought me to Calgary with the hope of finding this couple to come against them. And so when I started into deliverance with them, my mother left. She did not stay. And I realize now why she didn't stay is the intent of why I came here backfired. And this couple stuck with me through thick and thin. They stuck with me through everything that I did and said, we're not letting go. God told us we're to see you through, and we're going to see you through. So when that happened, she left and she moved on. And I felt like I was supposed to. I wrote a letter to my father and said, I've come into the truth of who I am. This is what I've grown up in. I said, I forgive you and release you, but I don't want any contact anymore. Yeah. He has tried, definitely, in multiple different ways. He actually came down to Calgary. I lived up north. He came down when I was first starting into deliverance, and he met with the whole congregation of leaders over this couple in the church that they were in, and he turned them all against them.
Wow.
And so they had been told to let me go, that I was going to be too much and that they shouldn't carry on with me. And he had convinced them all for that. And they went, no. They said, God told us we're to see her through, and we're going to see her through. And so there were many attempts to distract and to manipulate and to take this journey of deliverance off course, for sure. There were multiple attempts. But when I closed that door, and I think in all honesty, once I was free of so much, their hold on me didn't exist anymore, right? Yeah. So there was no relationship. I realized when I didn't have relationship as a healed and whole person, as Rachel, I realized they weren't accepting me as this new person because that's not who they knew.
Yeah.
That is not who they grew up with. That's not who they knew. I had moved on and they didn't. And so I had to start severing some ties. I still have some contact with my brothers that I grew up with, but not relationship. It's contact now and then just regarding certain things, but it's not relationship. And again, they asked about what I'd walked through, but they asked for tangible evidence, and it was something you can't give when it's a spiritual journey. They asked for things I wasn't able to give, and I explained it as well as I could, and I realized I don't think they accepted it. It wasn't something that they could believe for themselves. And so I became that alien in a strange land, and to my family, I think I was already out. There was a physical and emotional and spiritual severing that happened. So it was actually easy to walk away. The relationship with my mother continued for probably another 8 to 10 years. And that was very chaotic and it was very unhealthy. And I didn't realize until much later that I had thought my whole life that she was looking for freedom too. So I kept thinking, why did she not stay with this couple who obviously God had qualified somehow without knowledge or experience, but had qualified because they were willing and obedient to walk me through all the way to healing. Why didn't she stay with them? I was questioning that. And then I realized that wasn't her true intention all along. And so there's an interesting thing that happens with the kingdom of darkness. He's got many callbacks and many attempts to reestablish connection. And so for my mother, I was trying to restore some kind of real relationship, and I didn't realize that there was nothing real there to build on. And so I did receive what I call a callback, and I said no to it. I received a call. I was thrown into chaos and confusion. I was panicking and fearful because of what was coming across the phone line from her. And I stopped in my tracks and I asked God, and I said, God, help. And he said, it's a lie. And I went, okay. So whatever she was giving me that was attempting to hook me and to activate something again, I said no to. And I said, I'm ending communication here. And I hung up, and that was the last time that I talked to her. But I know one other person who was in our lives who walked through the same thing I did. But when she received her call back from my mother, she took it and she got sucked right back in. And I haven't seen her since. And it's always sad because there's so many fail-safes. The enemy has so many layers of things that he has in place. Basically, he will say, if you get to freedom, then you're going to encounter this wall. And if you get to this stage of freedom and healing, then you're going to encounter this wall. And he's got so many things in so many layers to kind of protect himself almost from the truth getting out and from someone like me walking away fully, that there were many things in place, but that was where God led me. I had learned to listen to his voice early on in my life, and I just knew his voice. And when he said, no, you don't receive this, don't come into agreement with this, I just knew. And I said no, and I did walk away free. And so there's no communication there either. I'm prayerful that God will restore her if she belongs to him. And this is, again, a question of, it's very hard to know with people in the occult. Are they completely sold out 100% to Satan? Or are they like me and they were caught and trapped and didn't know it and they want freedom? So I can never judge. Like, I will never be able to know. Only God knows those that are his and those that will be restored and redeemed and those that won't. So I hope that she will. I hope that anyone in my family who was involved against their will come. But I've realized for myself is my story was my story, and I can't live their stories for them. So they have to make the choice for themselves, and you can't make it for them. Yeah.
So who is Rachel now? Like, you walked through a 15-year journey of discovering the identity that was always yours and God's, but who is Rachel?
Who is Rachel? Oh my goodness. Well, the gift of words has always stayed with me, and I realize God has given me words as my key and my tool. And I think it's a powerful thing that he gives me to wield well under his leadership. And I know that it's a gift that he's given me to be able to bring darkness into light, but also to be able to help people like me understand that they can come out too, they can get freedom too, they can come into healing too, because the enemy's biggest lie is that someone like me is so impossible that I am unfixable, that I can't be redeemed because there's so much in there. There's so much sin, there's so much evil, there's so much demonic. It's impossible. But nothing is impossible with God. I have learned this over and over and over again. He is faithful. He can do anything. The most complicated situation, he can unravel with a word. He can unravel with his presence. And so for me, I want to be that voice. I was silenced my whole life. I was not able to express myself. I wasn't even able to know the truth about myself. So now that I'm here on this side of it, I want to be able to share, especially with those in darkness, that A, healing is possible, and B, is that Jesus can do anything if you say yes to him. There is absolutely nothing that he can't. So my purpose is, first of all, just to be his daughter. I had to come into identity first because everything in the kingdom of darkness is about duty, obligation. It's not free will, it's not choice, and it's not out of love. So everything is about being a servant or a slave. So I had to come into realizing I'm God's daughter first. Everything that I do will flow out of that. It can't be the other way around, or else I'm just sliding back into old patterns and old structures. But I love being a voice for the truth and revelation that he's given me. I love bringing awareness of this for people, but mainly with the purpose of I want to be a detriment to the kingdom of darkness. Now that he has used me so much for his purposes, I want to inflict damage. And there's so many ways that you can do that. But in all honesty, the best way is every single person that the enemy cannot take down with him on his continuous fall, every one that can be snatched out, because God has promised that he leaves the 99 to find the one. And I know that I was the one. Yeah. And he went to all lengths to get me out. So everyone that I can snatch out from the hands of the enemy, or even bring awareness to, so that this is lessened and the enemy's power is lessened, that's my hope and plan and purpose. That's what I fully believe God has created me for. When I was first delivered, I remember asking God, why? There's so many why questions with somebody like me. Why, God, did you allow me to live for so long in the kingdom of darkness when I belong to you? Why? Right? And I remember when that why actually changed, and I became very emotional as I said, why, God, did you choose me to pull out? Why did you actually put your hand on me to pull me out? Why? And he said, it's so you can tell others about me. Yeah. So everything I do is to bring them to him. Anything that I talk about, anything that I share, it's always, Jesus just says, just bring them to me, right? Show them me. I will do the rest. Yeah. I have no weight or responsibility to have to bring revelation or truth. I share my story and Holy Spirit does the rest. It's just like, I get to do my part in partnering with what he wants to do, and I get to be me in it. And I'm a person who loves fun. I love life. I'm, effervescent. I'm funny. I love to be silly. That, I've lived under such darkness that I love so many aspects of life. And I love the lighthearted and carefreeness of it. And that is not something I lived with growing up, but it's something that he made in me and is now being released. So my biggest purpose is I want to be fully alive to the person that God created me to be. And in doing so, I want to inflict the most damage on the kingdom of darkness that I can.
I love it. As you're talking, there's so many scriptures coming to mind, but I'm thinking of like Revelation 12:11. You probably know it because of your testimony, but they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony.
And the word of the testimony.
That's such a good way. And then when you say the enemy came to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I think it's so cool to see you living that life to the full. Because your life had been stolen for so long.
It had. Yeah, and God can redeem it. Like I don't believe any of those years are actually wasted. I know that he has restored everything that was lost, and he is able to redeem everything that is stolen. So I don't look back and say that I missed that first 20 years of being fully alive. God's actually restored it to me.
Amazing.
And what an invitation that you are extending to others.
Yeah.
Right, through your story, to have life into the full, and where to actually find the fullness of life. And so thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Thinking about next steps for healing. There's a spectrum of depending on where, it could be anything, but just thinking practically, what would you offer someone for next steps that wants to find healing?
Yeah. That's a huge question.
I know.
Connection and honestly relationship, I think, is the key. You cannot do it alone. There would have been no way that I could walk this out on my own. I needed people, and I needed people who would stand with me through everything and who knew how to hear God over everything else, because the enemy screams really loudly sometimes. So having a relationship connection, whether that's with the couple that I came to, they became my spiritual parents, and we are still in deep relationship now, 22 years later. Cool. And that was a huge key for me because I'd been such a loner. And so often people coming out of anything of darkness are loners, because that's who the enemy likes to he likes to isolate us. So the biggest thing I would recommend is get connected somewhere. Even if you don't trust yet, know that if you follow where Jesus is leading you, the trust will come. Trust with people was definitely restored for me. And getting connected to someone who is willing to do what God is asking of them for you. Because the knowledge that God fights for us is huge. We have to realize we don't have to do it ourselves, but we do have to come into agreement with him as the commander and him as the one who's going to be victorious for us. So that'd be my first suggestion. Get connected somewhere. And in all honesty, if there is no path ahead of you that you can see, start asking God for a path, because my goodness, he will make a way where there seems to be no way. He can do that. And I had started asking him very early. So ask him for that impossible road and he will lay it out.
Okay, you kind of touched on this, but as we wrap up, is there any advice that you would give, maybe if you could go back and talk to yourself, or if there's somebody, maybe they're not in the occult, but they do feel very repressed, or like they've, like you said, been isolated and they don't see a way through, see a way out? What advice could you give?
Well, if you can take anything from my story, let it be that there is always hope for something better. There's always hope for a full life. And God's truth surpasses every lie that we could possibly be told. So ask God for things for yourself, for sure. I needed to know how to hear his voice, even over others that were wise and were speaking to me. There is something very key about learning to hear the shepherd's voice. It says, that my sheep hear my voice and know it. So if you haven't fully known Jesus as one who speaks to you, start asking for his voice. It is very key to be able to know what he's saying to you, because your identity, he can call out of you with his voice and he can speak to those things. And it's really hard to actually look back and be able to give my old self any sense of advice. I would honestly, if I could go back in time, I would encourage myself to keep saying yes to God. That's the biggest thing I could do for myself then, when I couldn't do anything else, was I kept saying yes to him. Yeah. There's power in agreement, and we come into agreement with one of the leaders of the two kingdoms, whether we know it or not. We're either in alignment with God, the Most High God, and with Jesus Christ, or we're in alignment with Satan and with those who work for him. And so if you haven't made that choice, there's no fence. And I would definitely encourage people to know which side they want to be on, because they're polar opposites. And God's side is so awesome. It is so full of love and light and truth and joy. Like, there's so much joy to be had. So yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question sometimes to even think about.
It's fascinating how you, at the beginning, you said there's a lot of gray area in sort of the world you grew up in. But as you describe, the polar opposites of the kingdom of light and kingdom of dark, it sort of seems like the gray area. I know there's some good gray areas that we have to whatever do, but in this context, the gray area is the dark. Like, if you don't choose the light, you are choosing the dark. Yeah. And it's fascinating how I feel like Satan is so good at disguising himself in the gray area sometimes.
Very much so. And that was me. I look at myself and I realize I was one of those people, in the total gray area. And yet I'm a very black and white person. I believe in truth. I believe in not truth as in what is my opinion and what have I even experienced, but truth as in what does God say? What is the actual black and white side of this picture? And how do I see it as he sees it? Because I couldn't see anything for what it really was. But when God stepped in and was able to give me his eyes, the picture changes so much. You're able to see it from his perspective, and his view on me and my life was completely different than my own.
Wow.
And so asking for his perspective is really important, just to be able to know, even for yourself, just asking him, Jesus, how do you see me? And what he says can change you. Completely.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm sure there's still lots of questions floating around.
I'm sure. But that's what the book is for.
I was going to actually ask, because you are a writer, you're still writing. Where can people find you? We'll put this in the show notes, but if you want to
for sure. I mean, the two books are different. Like I said, the first book, Becoming Rachel, goes into my story. It has a timeline. It tells the whole thing from kind of the start in my childhood right through what we've talked about and into the full stages of healing. And it ends just a couple years ago. And then the second book is called Truth Leaks, and it's the collection of all the poems that broke everything apart. And it has an encouragement to those that are broken to let God go to the deep wells, to the deep things in them, and let it come out. And so both of them right now are available through me. I have copies. Again, I'm in Calgary and am happy to provide people with copies. I am in transition with my publisher, so I am in that movement process right now where they're not available online yet. That will come in the next couple of months where you'll be able to get them off of Amazon, but it just takes a little bit of time. But I do have copies personally, and so my email I'm sure you can put in the link.
Sure.
It's very easy to find. I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as author Rachel McKenzie. I'm very easy to find that way too.
We'll put that in the show notes too.
And if someone's interested in knowing more, I am quite literally an open book, and I say that without a pun. I'm an open book. I welcome questions always, because there are so many questions, and questions for me were a key that God gave me. I needed to ask questions, so I welcome questions. And I welcome if someone wants to read the story, they can reach out to me for a book, and if they're local, I can get it to them, and if they're in Canada, shipping's only $5.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, thanks again, Rachel.
Yes.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
Thank you.
This was a joy and an honor. Thank you guys for having me.
So good to have you here. Wow. What a story.
Yeah, so many things to think about. I feel like I know I will listen again to this just to unpack everything that we talked about. Really want to read her book also,
me too.
just to read a little bit more into her journey. I mean, for me, the thing that stood out, I mean, there's so many different things, but to come down to the very end when she said there's always hope for a full life.
Yeah.
Say yes to God.
Yeah.
That whatever you're going through right now, whatever circumstances you're facing, uncertainties in life, trauma, there's always hope for a full life. She also said God fights for us and we don't have to do it ourselves. And when I think about how often we can feel lonely or feel like we are alone, even coming out of COVID, the loneliness epidemic that we're facing as a society.
Yeah.
And that we don't have to live life alone, and how important it is for us to be in community.
Yeah, her saying like that's what one of the biggest helps was for her getting out, was having community. Really shows the importance of that.
Yeah, and relationship and doing life together. She was even sharing how it took time to trust. Like it didn't come right away. It's not like she instantly trusted these people, but the willingness to try and keep trusting. I can't imagine how difficult that would have been for her, but again,
Yeah.
your
whole sense of reality was just blown to pieces, and then you have to rebuild. It's amazing. I really loved when she talked about being in the mall, and like her assignment was to assign demons to people and stuff like that. And it just made me think about, and I said this in the episode, but just how intentional we as believers have to be. Like, we have to be on our guard. We have to be wearing the armor of God and using the sword of truth, which is the word. And it compelled me to want to be more intentional with whenever I go anywhere, right? Like, we are bringers of light.
Yes, we bring light to dark places.
But do I always think of that? No. I'm usually like, you got my to-do list or whatever. And it makes me think about to not wear that armor lightly, and to wear the armor in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And, throughout the episode, just her focus of just wanting to know the Lord, not focusing on the enemy.
Yes.
But
so
focusing on Jesus and looking to him, because we can easily be distracted.
It's that whole thing, right? When you're driving, wherever you're looking is where you're going to go.
Yeah.
It's true, though. It's true. If you're looking at the enemy, you're going to go there. So fix your eyes on Jesus.
Fix your eyes on Jesus.
Yeah. So many good things. Also, just one, like her name. And I loved how God knew her name. That
was cool.
And she knew it in her heart. Because I think about, like, we have been created in his image. So, of course, he knows who we are. And, like, she talked about the blueprint. And it's like, we have been designed in his image. So we are familiar to him. He is familiar to us. Even if, there's been a lot of life that's happened, in her case, very fragmented ways, there's still that blueprint from God.
Yeah. And I also love how she said that she didn't lose years. I found that really interesting, because sometimes I feel like if we've been hurt, we've lost something, we've lost years, or because of something that's happened in our lives, and how she feels like God redeemed that even more, so that she didn't lose those years.
If you think about, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he stole them, but like, God is abundant. He has everything, so he can restore them. Like, it's so good.
It's so good. Yeah.
Her life is so amazing. And I'm sure most of us listening can't relate to being in the occult, but man, I sure have some takeaways. I have some things that I can apply to my life. I hope you do as well if you're listening to this.
Yeah. And on that note, we would love for you to actually share that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Share it on your social media. Comment if you're listening on Spotify. There's a question box there, but what did you enjoy about the episode? And so fill that out. Write us a review.
Yeah, we would love to highlight, those that have given us reviews or have shared comments and start connecting with you, because we know you're listening. We know you're here. But when I think about relationship, we want to hear you. we would love to connect with you. You can send us an email at podcast@faccalgary.com. Again, you can comment or tag us on social media, even if you tag at FAC Calgary. We're all over the place and we'd love to connect. We will leave Rachel's books in the show notes when we get those. Mm-hmm. Hopefully by the time this airs, we'll have those links for you, links to her social media for sure.
Yep. You did say you wanted to highlight somebody that's commented.
Yeah.
We have a comment from Jamie from episode 12. The big C is their hope after a cancer diagnosis. Jamie commented on Spotify and said, strength doesn't come by bearing more burdens. It comes by letting burdens down. That was what Fern said. And he said, this was exactly what my soul needed to hear today. Thank you, Fern, for sharing your journey and your wisdom. I should say I said he, but Jamie, I'm not sure.
That's okay.
But you could comment and let us know. Anyways. Thank you for commenting, Jamie. We would love to feature more, like you said, Corey, just feature more comments. So go ahead and do that. And
And I just want to say thank you to Ryan, who is our lovely editor, who puts this all together, makes everything sound wonderful, works tirelessly to
take out the ums and the uhs and the...
We appreciate you so much, Ryan. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to our listeners. Really appreciate you joining us on this journey. If it's your first time joining us, we would encourage you to look back and see we have some really great episodes, a whole bunch of different topics that will encourage you just as much as this one. So, And last but not least, I agree. Thank you to Rachel. Thank you for being here with us and giving your time and sharing your story. And until next time, thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.